Welcome to the Stewardship Sessions, the podcast where money meets meaning. Here, we talk about building wealth with wisdom, shaping a mindset rooted in purpose, and pursuing a mission guided by faith. I'm your host, Jason Stanley, and together we'll explore intentional living, one conversation at a time. Hey, good morning. So, on this episode, I thought we'd talk about this idea of choosing to be happy, right? And there's a lot of emphasis in our society around happiness, right? Do what makes you happy. There are people who get up in the mornings and they're, basically, do little weird rituals where they're like, I'm happy, that kind of stuff. The thing with happiness is it's a moment in time, right? So happiness is situational, and I would say that rather than happiness, focusing on joy, right? And it sounds like they should be the same thing. Joy should be the same thing as happiness. It's really not. If we speak in biblical terms, I think it's James 1 verses 2 through 4. Basically, it says, "Consider it joy when you are presented with many trials." And then there's a verse in Philippians, I believe Philippians 4, that talks about, when you're going through hard times to with joy, with joy in your heart, make your petitions known to the Lord, and the peace that surpasses all understanding will be given to you, and all that stuff. So, at the end of the day, when you look at it, and if you're just focused on trying to be happy all the time, really happiness is, I would say, almost a chemical response in the brain. Right? It's the dopamine release that we get, right? We get happy when we buy something new. And that's why you hear people, and, probably more so I hear this from women than I do men, but therapeutic shopping, right? And that's the momentary happiness that you get when you get something new, or you accomplish something, right? That's that momentary dopamine response in the brain that you're getting, whereas joy is more of a foundation. It's more of a mindset. It's more of a frame of mind, and I think it's interesting that in that verse, that I told you about in James 1, I think it's 2 through 4, it says to consider it joy, right? It doesn't say be joyful. It just says consider it joy, which means that it's a choice. We have to choose to be at peace with our current circumstances and current trials, and understand that, again, going back to what I've said in the past, they're not happening to us, they're happening for us. And when you change that perspective, you can find joy even in a hard time. And again, joy tends to be more foundational and more of a longer term outlook than happiness, And so I think in our society today, we're so pre-consumed with this idea of, I just want to be happy, right? And really what people are trying to say, and I think what they're trying to articulate, is they want to be joyful. They want to have peace in their life. They want to be at peace with their circumstances and be able to, feel that in every situation, And so, again, happiness is somewhat fleeting, in my opinion, You might do something and feel happy in a moment, right? You feel happiness when you do something exciting, But joy is more of the decision to be at peace and to realize that in every situation you can control the outlook of that situation, right? You can't control what happens to you. You can't control what good happens in your life. You can't control all the bad things that happen and that kind of stuff. But you can absolutely control how you respond to it. And if you respond to that in a way that where you're choosing to be joyful in it, where you're saying, hey, in spite of these circumstances, I have all of these things, and this is going back to what we've talked about many, many times. I have all these things to be thankful for. Yes, this is a hard time, um, and recognizing it for being a hard time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that there's a lot of people that will try to gloss over hard times, and they'll say, oh, just be happy, choose happiness and that kind of stuff. And that it doesn't always work, because there are things that are difficult in life. There are things that are very hard to go through, right? If you lose a loved one, or you go through an illness in your life or something like that, those can be very trying moments. So, when you're choosing, you can't necessarily just turn that into a happy occasion where you're getting that dopamine shot and that dopamine release where you feel good all the time, right? So joy becomes more of a process in which you start to look at your circumstances and say, okay, yeah, this sucks, but I have all this stuff to be thankful for. It's repositioning that focus. You're not trying to make yourself happy in that moment. You're focusing on what you can control. And what in that moment, what you can control is how you're responding to those situations. So, it's kind of, I think probably the best example would be if you're, in a heated argument, maybe with a loved one, right? Um, Good luck finding happiness in that moment. But if you stop the argument and focused on, the qualities that you really appreciate about that person, right? That's going to change the way that you react to them. That's going to change the process in which you react to the situation. And rather than looking at everything as being against you, right? Maybe they're dealing with something that you're not thinking of. And by shifting your mind on that, by looking at that from a different angle, different lens, you're able to then experience what I would consider joy, which is, more of a longer term outlook on something. You're able to see the good in every situation, or see the good to come in every situation. But again, it's a choice. You have to choose to look at things in a different manner. We live in a society where we see everything as threatening to us, right? And we take so much personal when it's not. When somebody says something that, is mean or derogatory, or they are angry with us, or, whatever it is that we're going through, we look at that as a personal attack. We don't ever, excuse me, we don't take the time to shift the focus and say, what could they be going through, that's causing them to act like this, right? When you shift that, when you shift it from being internal to being outside of you, then it's less threatening, and you're able to keep your peace about you, right? If you're letting things control your happiness, right? If you're letting things control your joy in life, right? Those things then have power over you, right? So if it's a person that is talking to you in a certain manner, or somebody who's cut you off on the road, right? A lot of times we internalize that, and we see that as something in ourselves rather than seeing that as an action that they're doing, and we don't fully understand the mindset that they're in at that point in time, and we don't understand all the circumstances that are leading to them to that. So suppose you're going down the road and you get cut off by somebody, and then you find out later that that person was rushing to the hospital because their child was in a serious accident and wasn't going to make it. Would you feel as bad? Would you be as angry about it? Probably not. Because, we recognize in that moment that there was a bigger need at play, that it had nothing to do with us. But oftentimes, what we'll do is we'll take and internalize that and think that they are trying to act against us in a hostile way. And maybe they are, but still, changing your perspective gives you control over the situation. And when you have control over the situation, you can control the emotions that go with it. I don't know if you're familiar with, some of the philosophical teachings of Stoicism, but Stoicism, on some levels, I think is actually really good teaching. It's teaching you to control the internal dialogue, the internal emotions that you carry in every situation. And rather than internalizing everything that's happening to you as being a threat against you or something that is meant to harm you, it's redirecting that focus back outward and saying, look, these are situations that are outside of my control. And the power that I possess is my ability to control how I react. So if somebody says something to you that is mean, or they're angry with you about something, if you meet that anger with anger, right, that's just going to prolong that situation. If you simply disconnect from that conversation and look at that in a different way, now it becomes more focused on the other person and allows them to work through whatever it is that they're working through. And you may have done something to tick them off, but chances are, just as you necessarily didn't do that on purpose, they're not actually that angry with you, right? They're angry with something that they have going on in their own life. So, I would say, again, it's really interesting to me that in that verse in James, that it says, consider it joy when you're going through trials. It's that choice that you get to make. It doesn't say, hey, you have to be joyful in all your trials. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say, you should be at peace with everything. It says, consider it. Change your mind a little bit. Look at it at a little different angle. And when you do, you stop giving whatever you're going through the power over you and over your internal joy, over your life, and over your circumstances. So many times we hand over the power to our own joy, our own circumstances, to situations, right? And that's why I said happiness is situational, because happiness is a momentary response to a situation, whereas joy, or choosing to be joyful in something, is the decision that you're making to focus on what is good in your life. Because even when you're going through hard times, there's still things that are good. I'll give you an example. I'd gone through, I talked about this in another episode. I'd gone through kind of a long drawn out lawsuit with a previous employer whenever I left and broke off and started my own thing. I get to the end of that, and literally a week later, I was told I had bladder cancer, right? And, I don't know if you know anything about that. It doesn't sound too significant, but the reality is bladder cancer is far more deadly than breast cancer or prostate cancer. And, so, they have to hopefully catch it early and that kind of stuff. But if it spreads, it spreads very rapidly. And it can be very dangerous. And so, here I am healthy. I was barely 40 years old. I was healthy. I didn't smoke. I didn't, do anything that was unhealthy. I tried to eat healthy. I worked out on a regular basis, and yet, cancer presented itself. And so, at the initial response of that, it was devastating to hear that news. And it took about a week of me, asking, well, why is this happening? I don't understand, and being frustrated for me to kind of go through the exercise. And I said, look, instead of focusing on this, instead of giving this energy, I'm going to focus on what my goals are. I'm going to focus on what's good in my life. And that's the moment in time where I changed the way that I prayed and started praying by thanking God for everything that I had, right? And I've talked about this many times, but that's the moment when that happened, when I decided that I was going to focus on what I could be thankful for in my life, and no matter what my situation was. And there have been plenty of situations since then, right? Knock on wood, I've been completely clear now since 2018. Haven't had any reoccurrences or anything like that. And I'm thankful for that. But I've also never really made it a focus in my life. I don't really even like talking about it. I'll share it in a situation like this, but I don't really like talking about it. Not because I'm trying to avoid it, but because I'm trying to keep my focus on what I have that is good in my life. And when I focus on what I have that is good in my life, I feel joy. I feel peace inside. And regardless of my circumstances, regardless of the hard time that I might be going through at that point in time, whether it's a business trial or a personal trial or arguments with loved ones or something like that, when I reshift the focus of my mind to what is good, it changes the way that I react to that situation. And it's been amazing to watch. And it's been amazing to do. It's a hard exercise to do because the world continually tells you that you are a victim of your circumstances, that you are, whether somebody doesn't agree with your political ideology or, whatever it is, right? That you're the victim and everybody's mean to you, or your situation, or you're sick and, you're the victim of that illness, whatever it is. We teach victimhood very, very well in our society. And when you redirect your focus, you're taking yourself out of that victimhood state. I recently had a friend that had reached out to me, and he's frustrated with their current financial situation, and he says, I don't understand how we don't have enough money, and we make plenty of money, but we're always in the hole, and I don't understand it, right? And what I realized in listening to him talk is that he was allowing that situation to define who he was. He was allowing their choices, right? He wasn't paying attention to the choices they were making that led him to that position. He was instead focusing on being a victim. This broke, and therefore I had to go pay for that, and so that's why I don't have money. And or this went wrong, and I had to go pay for that, and that's why I don't have money. Rather than looking at what are my behaviors around that situation and what can I start to change. And again, we live in this world of compounding returns. And so when you give yourself a story, whatever that story is what will start to become real in your life. I'll say manifesting, but it's not manifesting like people normally think of. I'm not a big proponent of this idea of manifesting stuff, but I do think that your life starts to manifest out the story that you tell yourself on a regular basis. So if you think that you're not good enough, or you think that you, aren't smart enough or whatever, you'll actually live that out, because again, you can't have those two competing concepts living in your mind. You'd go insane. And so, you can't say, oh, well, I'm broke, and then expect to have abundance of wealth in your life, or any wealth for that matter. You'll actually just get rid of it. You'll do whatever's necessary to get rid of it, and there's people that I work with from time to time that, are, in debt, or they're getting out of debt. And one of the first things that I always tell them is, don't focus on debt, because that's what you'll start to get more of if that's where your focus is at. Focus on, how do I build wealth, right? And the debt elimination is just a process of that building wealth. And so it changes the way that they're saying it, changes where their focus is going. Because a lot of times when we're focused on what's wrong, we end up getting more of that. We live in a feedback system. And we end up in these feedback loops where we're constantly getting fed back whatever we're putting out. And if you guys remember the episode where I talked about it, when I was a kid, there was a adage that said, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing, meaning that if you were constantly watching garbage and listening to garbage and stuff, then that tended to be how your life went. And so if you want to change your life, one of the easiest ways, and I've talked about this many, many times on this podcast, is start by focusing on what you're thankful for. It's one of the easiest ways to change your perspective and change your life, is when you're focused on what you're thankful for, you become joyful. You can't not be joyful and be thankful, because gratitude is saying, hey, I have all of this, whether it's your health, whether it's your ability to walk. I mean, we have so many things to be thankful for, and you look at certain people that have been through horrific events, right? People that have gotten paralyzed or had an amputation or had serious health issues, and yet they seem to be so at peace and they're okay with it. And then you see other people that go through similar instances and they're angry and they're lashing out at people, and they've decided to adopt that as their life, and let that illness or that limitation in life limit what they're able to do as a human. And we're able to do so much as humans, even beyond our physical capacities. And, so again, real simple. I think that there's a choice that you have to make in every situation. And I'm not saying don't be blind to the hard time. Don't ignore it. Don't pretend like it doesn't exist. Acknowledge it. Absolutely acknowledge when you are going through a hard time, whatever that is. If you're going through a hard time in a relationship, or you're going through a hard time in your business, or you're going through a hard time in your health, acknowledge what it is. And then going back to what I've said before, instead of saying, why is this happening to me? Ask why it's happening for me. And when you start to look at why is it happening for me, now you can start to focus on what is good in your life, right? And start to look at what could be the potential outcomes of this. I've got a very good friend that went through a very messy divorce here recently. And he would come over at the beginning and he was very, very upset. And this was the end for him, right? I'll never find anything as good as that. Nobody's ever going to be the same as her. And, he just wallowed in it for so long. And I kept telling him, I said, hey, you have to start looking at the fact that this could lead to something far better than what you expected. And it's taken him some time, but the reality is he's met somebody, and I would say they're a far better match than him and his ex ever were. And he's so much happier and so much more at ease around her than I ever saw him with his former spouse. And I was with him the other night, and I said, so how does it feel now? How do you feel now on this side of it versus where you were? And he said, it's way better than anything I could have ever imagined. But it took him going through that process of figuring out how to deal with that situation, acknowledge that it was a situation he didn't want to be in and didn't like, but refocusing on what he had that was good in his life and coming up with a new way of living. And when he did that, then the right people started to show up in his life. And it wasn't mystical, it wasn't magical or anything like that. It was just simply he was in the place and the mindset at that point in time to be able to actually see opportunity, to have a joyful relationship, to have a good relationship, a healthy relationship, you know? And, you know, so those are just some basic examples of, real life things that people go through on a regular basis. And again, you can have people that go through the same situation and it sidelines them and they become bitter and they become angry and they lash out at people and they, constantly are looking at themselves as a victim. Or you can choose to be the person that looks at what's good in your life and recognize that when you go through trials, you oftentimes will come out of the other side of it much better than what you went into it as. Right? Having gone through the cancer in my life, gave me a whole different perspective on life. Gave me a different perspective on learning to enjoy moments rather than always looking into the future. I was one of those people that was always looking ahead very anxiously. I knew that I wanted certain things, but I was always very anxious about it. And I was very worried about what the future was going to hold. And I would say more often than not now, it's not perfect. It's not that I never default to that way of thinking. I do sometimes. But more often than not now, I focus on what I have that is good. And when I focus on what I have that's good in my life, that centers me in that moment. And I'm able to focus on that and enjoy that moment so much more than what I used to. And so it's also given me the perspective of I'm not going to live a deferred life. We're never guaranteed tomorrow. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be careless with my finances and just go buy whatever I want and that kind of stuff. It just means that I am going to take each moment that I'm given and try to make the most out of that moment. Even the times that are hard, and finding joy in those trials that I'm going through, because I still go through them. Even though I've had some success, even though I've been free of that illness and that kind of stuff, I still go through hard times, just like anybody else does. I'm not impervious to it, and again, I take the moment to recognize what it is and where I'm at, and recognize that it's a difficult situation. I try to think through it, but I immediately, if I find myself starting getting frustrated, I immediately revert back to, these are the things in my life that are good, and focusing on what I can control, making that choice to be joyful through the process of a trial, right? And I don't care if it's the Bible or, philosophical books or whatever it is that you read, every book around that, every teaching around trials always teaches the same thing. Trials are there to grow you, not to hurt you. And so if you go into it with that perspective, you absolutely will grow out of that situation. You'll learn stuff. You'll learn what works sometimes. You'll learn what doesn't work sometimes. And, we live in this world, in this society where, again, we practice victimhood very well, and almost too well, in my opinion. And we are focused on, short-term happiness, right? A momentary happiness. We want happiness right then. We want that dopamine, right? So we'll go out and we'll buy something or try to fill, the frustrations that we have with something that gives us just short-term happiness, rather than looking at our current situation and saying, all right, this is going to make me a better person. And, again, we've also made failure something that's to be shameful of, and failure is one of the great teaching tools. Failure teaches you what you're really passionate about, what you're really um, good at, and what you're not so good at sometimes. And sometimes it teaches you what you're not really passionate about. Maybe you think you want something and you realize that you don't want it later on, you know? And so when you're going through those times, again, take the time, refocus what you're, how you're looking at it. Focus on what you're thankful for. Focus on what's good in your life and see what the outcome is. It's the easiest way to start changing your life. It's the easiest way to start making changes that start to compound throughout your entire life. And it's really hard to be upset when you're thankful, right? It's really hard to be upset when you're focused on what it is that you do have in your life. So again, you can't control everything that happens to you, but you can absolutely control how you react to a situation. And a lot of times our default reaction isn't the one that is the best for us. If somebody's having a bad day and they lash out at us and we lash out back at them, now we've created problems. Um, and then you have to try to undo what you've said and the actions that you've taken and that kind of stuff. And that's a hard thing to do. And it doesn't push us forward as humans when we react that way. So if we take the time and slow it down and just, there's the old adage, count to 10 or something like that. Whatever exercise you have to do to kind of give yourself that moment to control your emotions, look at something in a logical way, and then refocus those emotions onto something that's more positive in your life. It will completely change the way people act towards you. It'll completely change how you react to people and ultimately make your life a lot better. So, not a very long one, but figured I'd share that with you. It was something that I learned this week. Actually, not this week. It was part of a Bible study I was doing a couple weeks ago, and I just thought it was interesting how that verse read of consider it joy, right? It means that it's a choice, not a command. It's not, hey, be joyful. It's saying, hey, consider this joy, right? Consider looking at this in a different way and understand that these trials are here to make you better and that you're going to come out of the other side of this, whatever it is that you're going through, and probably be a lot better of a person than you were going into it. So until next time, everybody stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you guys soon.